platform, we are unable to play the national anthem. However, we are noting that as the province of KwaZulu-Natal in particular, we have been affected by the recent floods during the month of April, whereby we are saying our fellow brothers and sisters, they are still looking for their family members that were lost in that period. Some have buried their loved ones. In some families, more than one family member. We want to assure our fellow brothers and sisters in KwaZulu-Natal that the only difference between ourselves and them is that they have lost their family members that they were linked with blood and flesh. Otherwise, we are sharing with them the pains and we are with them in prayers. But also, just the recent weekend, this demon was coming back again. Having said that, may I then request that as part of also of observing and respecting various religions, may I request that we all, wherever we are, we all stand up and observe the moment of silent prayer in remembrance of our people that have lost their lives, particularly during this particular period of the floods. May we all rise and observe the moment of silent prayer. May the departed souls of our loved ones rest in eternal peace. Thank you. You may be seated. Distinguished guests, as a way of introduction, I am Phumlile Kwazulu, the chairperson of the Standing Committee on Public Participation and Petitions in Kwazulu-Natal Legislature. My role during this session is to drive the proceedings so that the objectives of this session are achieved. Noting that this is an online event, it will be remiss of me not to request all our participants to observe some housekeeping rules that are aimed at ensuring that our session is a resounding success. You'll pardon me if I'm preaching to the converted ones, but allow me to just request that you observe these few online etiquettes. They are just four, honorable members. One, may I request that we switch off our phones and videos if we are not on the podium. We will only allow those who are in the podium to kind of switch it on so that we are able to see the one that is participating. Should you wish to contribute to the discussion, you may do so by raising your hand through your device so that I will note you. Should you not be able to raise your hand, you may use your device and call for a recognition. I will then recognize you and give you the opportunity. And lastly, but most importantly, make sure that your background is not offensive or unpalatable to views when using a video facility. We normally encourage that if we are, particularly the members, obviously, we use the background that indicates that we program kahulumeni wethu. But also, honorable members, as a way of introduction to our session, the month of May is recognized as the Africa Month, a time when the continent of Africa commemorates the founding of the Organization of African Unity, the OAU. The establishing of the Organization of Africa Unit in 1963, the African continent became a pioneer in being the first continent to focus on continental unity and to ensure national building through unity and freedom from expression. Yet, even before 1963, many initiatives were taken by Africans, both from the continent in its diaspora, for Africa to regain its rightful place in the world. South Africans are also found amongst those earlier generations who made enormous contributions towards this effort. The speech of the late and the former president of the African National Congress, Dr. Pixlika Isakasemi, in 1906 on the regeneration of Africa will be echoed by the generations that followed. And through several initiatives aimed at decolonization and regeneration of the continent. Africa Month also seeks to increase the appreciation and demand for arts and culture, goods and services, and to stimulate competitive markets for trade among African countries. Members, we have lined up a very exciting list of speakers that will make input on the significance of this day. First and foremost, may I invite our honorable speaker, Udadewethu Unontebeko Nothemba Waka Boys, who will give us the purpose of Africa Day lecture. May I then hand over to you, honorable speaker of the KZN legislature.
Thank you, Program Director, Honorable ZRP Zulu, the chairperson of the Standing Committee on Public Participation and Petitions in our legislature, the Honorable Deputy Speaker, Mr. Artim Tembo, Honorable Premier Zigalala, and the entire executive, the members of the legislature of KwaZulu-Natal, presiding officers and office bearers, all members of parliament, and other legislatures that are with us, the speakers from the other provinces, including the deputy speakers that are with us, our presenters, Ms. Nomfanelo Kota and Mr. Ferrous Wamba, our distinguished guests, and our viewers from home. Ndiyanibulisa ngale mini yokuzinga kwethu ngobu Afrika bethu. Thank you for this opportunity to be with us in this platform that we are in. Honorable members, presiding officers, and the program director, the founding of the Organization of African Unity on the 25th of May, 1963, which was a forerunner of the African Union, signaled a bold step of our leaders of the time to unite Africa in fighting all the battles that faced Africa and her people. At that time, Africa had to contend with the might of the illegitimate governments imposed by the Western colonizers through the barrel of a gun sometimes. The war that Africa faced was therefore multi-pronged, coming from all fronts, including economic, social, cultural, and more importantly, political. Whilst then the total liberation at the political level of the continent from the Western powers was the ultimate objective, so was the socio-economic, cultural, as well as the silencing of the guns in our continent amongst the top. Most countries are now free from the yoke of the Western imperialists. The continent is now therefore faced with new challenges, which have led to the continued subjugation of Africans. The continued deprivation of Africa and her people is still evident through internecine wars, mainly arising from the continued manipulation of some African leaders by the West, which results in poverty and leading to an unfulfilled potential of Africa and her people as a whole. It is the ideals of total political, socio-economic, and cultural aspirations that still propel us to seek a united and prosperous Africa as we hold this year's installment of Africa Day commemoration. The 25th of May still represents the aspirations of our forebears as it does to our current leaders. In the previous electoral terms, the legislature of KwaZulu-Natal commemorated this day through a debate in the House by members. There were always views that the Africa Day commemoration should be more impactful and must involve the broader citizenry of our province and beyond. So at the beginning of the 6th electoral term, we conceptualized the webinar political lecture version, but our plans were thwarted by the advent of the COVID-19 and the subsequent lockdown. But during this year's midterm strategic plan review session, we resuscitated the discussion and resolved that a webinar or or lecture should be amongst the platforms that we must use to deepen public education. Therefore, it is for that reason that the Africa Day lecture found expression as part of the KwaZulu-Natal Legislature Vote 2 budget speech almost 2 weeks ago. Program Director and our guests, whilst COVID-19 may have brought limitations in traveling, but we could ill afford to waste the opportunities to presented, such as a platform of virtual gatherings, conveniently and at a cost-effective manner. This is only held back by the continued lack of network coverage in some parts of KwaZulu-Natal, South Africa, and Africa at large. We must therefore, on this day, urge our governments to speed up the connectivity of all communities so that we continue engaging our stakeholders across the length and breadth of our province without any hindrance nor deprivation due to lack of network connectivity. As we hold this inaugural Africa Day lecture, we are holding it under the theme Strengthening Resilience in Nutrition and Food Security on the African Continent. This theme calls upon us all to pay attention to what has been part of the Commonwealth Parliamentarians Association resolve to strengthen our efforts to ensure food security through advancing delivery on what we lack as African countries, which is land ownership and advanced technological techniques of farming. Regardless of the fact that we have vast lands, we still lack land ownership. The CPA Africa region recently took stock on what is happening in the continent in this regard. This theme is also relevant for empowering ourselves as KwaZulu-Natal legislators on how to effectively oversee the implementation of this program within our province. This is especially important because we are a province that is currently facing two disasters: COVID-19 and the unseasonal floods that occurred in April and continued this month, including over the past weekend. A trail of destruction that these disasters has inflicted on the people and infrastructure is incalculable. The impact of the recent floods will be long felt by our communities and government. The fact that there are families who still haven't found their missing relatives who are victims of the floods will affect how we as Africans deal with finding closure following death for a very long time to come. Some families may recover, but others will carry this burden long into their next generations because that is who we are as Africans. We respect and mourn our departed. Another impact that we must anticipate is how we recover from the disaster and be able to continue with the agenda as called upon by the theme. There are areas that are disconnected from the sources of food in the province of KwaZulu-Natal as we speak, and others face food scarcity already. These and other challenges call upon all of us within the African Union to rise up and talk about solutions to the persistent African challenges, no less food security. We need to confront the causes of Africa's continued suffering whilst we remain a continent blessed with the best mineral resources, vast acres of arable land, the great sources of water, gas, seas with the greatest harvest of seafood, fauna and flora. We must be able to deal with what causes Africans to flee their countries at the time of being governed by their own people. We must be bold as members of this legislature to have these discussions frankly, so that when we engage with our colleagues across the region, we don't speak what we feel, but we speak the reality of what is happening in Africa in our time of leadership. We must have uncomfortable discussions, including how Africa can continue business usual whilst the people of Western Sahara are colonized by another African state. It cannot be, unless we want to say what was played and fought for by our forebears was not just. I still believe that our forebears fought for a just war of liberating Africa. It was not only to liberate Africa from external colonizers, but also from colonizers that might arise from Africa. Our guest today will therefore assist us to initiate this discussion, and we will be left to carry on with it as a legislature internally, and more importantly, through the Public Participation and Petition Standing Committee led by you, Honorable Zulu. In conclusion, Honorable Zulu, I want to say that today we must, through our actions, relive the words uttered by President Kwame Nkrumah this day back in 1963, when he said, I quote, "We have awakened, we will not sleep anymore," close quote, and reverberate across the continent through the impact of our work in changing the status quo in our continent, but starting also by changing the status quo here in KwaZulu-Natal on how we relate as Africans broadly, but also how we relate as Africans in a space where we have to contend for some socio-economic opportunities. Honorable Program Director, that is why we have these guests amongst us, Ms. Nomfanelo Kota, who is a known commentator and a former diplomat in the international relations sector, as well as a lecturer from the University of KwaZulu-Natal, Mr. Ferrous Wamba, who will be speaking to us today and ensure that we get this discussion going. It's not only going to be an Africa Day on the 25th of May, but we must live as Africans and continue to have an impact on how our continent goes forward from here. Ndiyabulela kakhulu umphathi wohlelo Mageba Sithuli Skandaba.
Siyabonga Mahubela. Sibonga umhlahlandlela owunikezayo, particularly that asiphili kuphela mhla ka-25 kuMay being the Africa Day, kodwa we must live up to the challenges that are facing the continent collectively. So the journey that was started by our forebears, the struggle still continues. Thank you so much for your valuable insight of the Africa Day. Now that the speaker has put us in the right frame of mind, may I take this opportunity to introduce our keynote speaker, as she has started, Honorable Speaker. She's a diplomat, an international communicator, a gender activist, social commentator on international relations and politics. Most of you will know her for her colorful career in the Department of International Relations and Cooperation, where she served with distinction for almost 20 years. She also served as a public diplomatic practitioner in the Permanent Mission of South Africa to the United Nations. She's currently the Principal Advisor, External Affairs at Rio Tinto's Johannesburg office. Ladies and gentlemen, may we please give a round of applause to Ms. Nomfanelo Kota as she takes the podium to deliver a lecture on Africa Day. Over to you, Dadewethu Nomfanelo.
Bye-bye.
Oh, Dadewethu Nomfanelo, over to you. While we are trying to get hold of unomfanele, because bekade connected, ngiyafisa also that we touch also on the issue of the theme for this Africa Day. We are saying we are strengthening the resilience in nutrition and food security on the African continent, strengthening agro-food systems, health and social protection systems for acceleration of human, social and economic development. I think we can all agree that we really need to go back and give a special focus on the issues of food security. We might have seen that food prices are really a challenge, but obviously, as the continent, we need to do something instead of saying we are facing some challenges. Rather, we're saying what is it that we can do differently so as to get different results. So that is the theme for the 2022 Africa Month that we are working on. But ngiyafisa ukucheckela ukuthi is our guest speaker in. Ngiyacela if we are not on the podium, that we mute our devices. Can we all ensure that our devices, our gadgets are on mute, so as to not to disturb the one that is on the platform? I am noticing that as the driver, we are having a challenge. However, I will then request your understanding and indulgence that if we can take the next speaker, then we will try and get hold of Dadewethu unomfanele. Distinguished guests, I'm now going to invite our next contributor to the lecture. This is Mr. Ferrous Wamba, and he's originally from the Democratic Republic of Congo, sorry, DRC, a true son of the soil. Mr. Wamba grew up as a refugee in both Burundi, Tanzania, as well as in South Africa. He did part of his secondary education in South Africa, and he completed his secondary education at Nomaswazi High School in Pietermaritzburg. He's a former student leader and social justice activist, a researcher and a lecturer of political science. He's currently registered for PhD in Policy and Development Studies at the University of Kwazulu-Natal Pietermaritzburg campus. May I then request that we also give a big round hand of applause as we welcome the son of the soil. Over to you, Mr. Ngwamba.
Thank you so very much, Program Director, Honorable Zulu, Chairperson of the Standing Committee on Public Participation and Petition, Honorable Nontombeko Nbiose, the Speaker of the Kwazulu-Natal Legislature, distinguished community leaders and representatives of different organizations, fellow Africans. I greet you in the name of Africa. Africa, which is our continent. It is always a more than a glorified moment to see sons and daughters of Mother Africa sitting together, discussing the issues affecting our continent, Africa. Program Director, ladies and gentlemen, in a discussion related to self-determination of us, African, and the quest for finding solution to any issue affecting us, I'm always persuaded to borrow the word from one of the prominent sons of Africa, an intellectual and the champion of African Renaissance, former President Thabo Mbeki. On the occasion of the passing of the new constitution of South Africa, Thabo Mbeki, the then deputy president, made a speech titled, "I am an African," on behalf of the African National Congress. In his speech, he started asserting that on an occasion such as this, we should perhaps start from the beginning. So, Program Director, allow me to start from the beginning. I believe the beginning in the discussion related to food security, there is a very important question that we need to ask, a question that can give birth to many questions. Those questions can be questions that will take us to the pre-colonial Africa and ask whether the challenges of food securities that we are facing now, we used to have them or not. And again, as Africans, when we are looking at food security related issues, we need to look at them as part of our identity. And here, I'm going to quote again former President Thabo Mbeki in the same speech. We as Africans, and he used the nomenclatura I, bring all our issues, our identities are defined on we owe our being to the hills and the valleys, the mountains and the glades, the rivers, the desert, the trees, the flowers, the seas, and the ever-changing seasons that defined the face of our native land. If you look at all of these features that he's mentioning, all of them can be linked directly to the issues of food securities. Land, trees, flowers, seas, and ever-changing seasons. Now with this, one can ask a question. Was Africa affected by food insecurity pre-colonial era? If yes, how did Africans survive before colonialism? How was the food system operated before that period of oppression, maladministration, human rights violation, undermination of culture, and our own identity? Now, I would call upon all of us, Program Director, to look at this Africa, pre-colonial Africa, and try to locate it within the premises of colonialism. Policies that were made during colonialism did end up affecting food production, nutrition, and many other issues related on productivities of products that are related to the living conditions of the people and the land. During colonialization, the colonial administration did secure land, labor, to produce crops that were going to be exported to the global north, which means they took over the continent, knowing very well that it's a continent that have resources, and knowing that they had themselves challenges on how to control these resources, to avoid themselves fighting among each other. They had to divide this continent into many different countries. And these countries became enterprises to respond to the need of the global north. As a result, the food structure, the food production system that existed before they arrived in the continent were undermined, were changed, and perhaps deleted completely from the agriculture practices that existed before. Basically, African farmers were forced to adopt new mechanisms of food production that did not much care about food security at a family level, food security at a village level, but drive them into food production that focus much more on producing crops, grains that are going to feed the global north, to feed the industries of the global north, to feed the social and geopolitical aspiration of the global north related to issues of food. These policies then did end up destroying existing features of the local management of food product, food productivity, and food security. Program Director, the colonizers, in their ways of trying to make sure that whatever that they wanted to do is successful in the continent, they did introduce new system of governance which could facilitate the management of resources, the management and governance of the people who were now subject of the colonies. They introduced different type of rules. The French and the British did introduce indirect rule system, which brought in a very small administration system within the colony, a system that did co-opt traditional leaders by giving them tasks that were aligned within the obligations and the visions of these colonial powers within those countries where they implemented indirect rule system. As a result, the traditional leadership that was supposed to be there to guide food production, to guide food-related activities, were given a new mandate, a mandate that is linked to the metropole. Now, this mandate did end up undermining the original role of traditional leaders in the society and how they supposed to manage the issue related to the society, as well as issues directly to agriculture, farming, and agriculture production. This indirect rule did create a new set of elites, an elite that was no longer capable to respond to food-related issues affecting the people, while its own focus became a focus of responding to the food-related challenges of the colonial powers. program director, this has created a very difficult situation to those countries that were indirectly ruled. A situation where subsistence farming that was there to respond to both the need of farmers and the need of families was changed and became a system that respond only to the market and the global north. In other parts of Africa, they adopted also peasant colonies. These peasant colonies could be seen mainly in West Africa, where Africans were forced to respond to what the colonial power needed in the metropolitan countries, where they will develop policies, the policies that guide the local farming in terms of producing food, producing crops that are needed in the colony, at the same time paying this peasant few amount of money that will allow them to sustain during the period of production of food. Another type of a system was also introduced in Southern African region, the settlement colonies. These settlement colonies were now these European powers who were their agent in the continent had now to occupy land that were very good in terms of location, climate conditions, in terms of the quality of the Arab land that was supposed to be used for food production. The people who were located in those areas had to be removed from those areas, and those areas were occupied by these new colonial masters who turned those areas, who turned those land to be piece of land that belongs to them, with the productivity strategy of responding to local market that is linked to the metropolitan and that is linked to the mining companies. And most of the countries that were affected are Kenya, Zimbabwe, Zambia, and South Africa, where these colonies had established advanced agricultural system that could produce more food product, but those food products were not necessarily produced to respond to the need of the local. Now, all of these issues and these aspects that were happening during that time had now developed a structural system that is very challenging in terms of how now the current African state could be able to respond to the need of the people, to respond to food-related need of the citizens and the entire regions. These systems that existed during colonialism had now created a situation where in early 1960s, when many African countries begin to get their freedom, they end up inheriting an agricultural system that does not care on the citizens of the country, an agricultural system that does not have a strategy to respond to the local market rather than responding to the international market. And you will see now, rather than African countries to produce more for the consumption of the local market, they continue to produce agricultural product that equally respond to the global north as it used to be before. And statistics shows that between 1960s to 1970s, many African countries did export more crops at the expense of food security at a local level. And this was done simply because before the colonial masters left the continent, they had a clear strategy and a roadmap that could allow them to protect the land, to protect agriculture interest in the continent by sending some of the local Africans to foreigner universities in the global north to study strategies, mechanism, and how they were going to come back and take over the colonial administration that was going to be left behind. And these new intellectual African elite in the agricultural sector, in research, did not have any obligation to come up with strategies that will allow them to develop ways of dealing with agriculture-related challenges with the idea of African solutions to African problems. Because most of them, they were trained to maintain the same agricultural system that existed. Now, all of this program director shows that the current food security challenges that we are facing, we can't only look at them from the current situations that we see in the industry itself. We need to go back and revisit some of the structural issues that were introduced in the agricultural sector, some of the policies that were introduced which deprived a huge number of people from using the land to produce products that could allow them to fulfill the need at a family level. At the same time, program director, if you look at the current situation and geopolitical aspirations of some of global north countries, some of the superpowers, in early 90s, they were able to use food productions, food as a tool to advance geopolitical aspirations. And that itself was supported by international organizations that drove policies that could not necessarily encourage local farmers to compete with farmers from the global north. As a result, farmers from the global south, especially in our continent, became to be unable to compete with farmers from the global north. And those farmers who could have the idea of competing with the global north, their productivity, their agricultural dreams were still linked to colonial dreams of agricultural product to be exported to the global north. With all of this, what needs to be done, program director, for me to conclude, is for us as Africans to begin to sit down and ask ourselves a question. What is it that we can do to develop new agricultural system, new policies that are linked to the local economy? We need to begin to think, what is it that we can do as a continent to develop policies that are friendly to our agricultural sector and link these policies to our foreign policies and how we relate to the global north. We need also to begin to think and develop a conversation around advanced research in agricultural machinery, in agricultural productivity, to see whether we can develop our own tools that can allow us to reach the dream of a continent that is food secured. With all of this, program director, allow me to say thank you so very much. And that was what I prepared for today. Asante sana.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for the input, a very valuable one, particularly that talks to the challenges facing us as the Africans. Indeed, we are the Africans. We noted that we had a challenge with our guest speaker, whom I have already introduced. That it might not be possible to introduce you to you, but otherwise the House has even welcomed you. But I understand the challenges that you were faced with. We really understand it, and we are sorry for any inconvenience that has happened. It was not our intention. Kodwa-ke, may I then request that once more, simuphe ihlombe elikhulu udadewethu esazothatha ipodium. May we give udadewethu Nomfanelo Kota a big round hand of applause. Thank you, Nomfanelo. Over to you, dadewethu. Nomfanelo, may I request that you unmute, and because I think you are already in, but I think it's a question of connectivity, or that you are not muted your device. Members, please accept our apology. We are trying to get hold of udadewethu uNomfanelo. We are working around the clock and tirelessly to resolve the matter. Nomfanelo, can you hear us? While we are making attempts to get hold of Nomfanelo, because we have also the issue of time constraints, may I then request that as part of trying to deal with the situation, if we can go to the item that talks to a discussion by members, where we need to seek clarity, if we can take them as well. We are hopeful that we'll get hold of our guest speaker as we progress. You might plan for the day, but obviously we also have to plan for the challenges that might come across as you progress. Really, it's not our intention. We really apologize, members that have connected. I'll request Mr. Tempe that you continue try to engage with her, because she's connected. I do not know what is the problem on her side. Can I then, in the interest of time, invite hands for that will contribute to the lecture, or even those that will kind of seek clarity?
You have reached the mailbox of At the tone, record your message, then press hash or hang up.
I'm seeing the hand for Lucas, and for now, that is the only hand. I will take hands as they come. May I then give an opportunity over to you, Lucas?
Sanbonan. Hello, can you hear me? Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, yeah, yes,
we can hear you.
Okay. I think my contribution, maybe I should say, my name is Lucas. I work for the Council of Churches on this issue of agro-food systems and how Ferrous presented it. I wanted to bring the other side of this kind of historical presentation, the side of theology. At the commencement of the OAU, the Organization of African Unity, at the same time, the All Africa Council of Churches was formed, and the churches of AACC were part of the formation of the OAU, and there was also kind of the colonial side of that. By the colonial side, I mean with colonization was Christianization. With that was also the form of Western civilization. And I used to argue, and I argue up to now, that there is nothing called really clearly Western civilization. Actually, we talk here about world civilization because the West not only taking the resources, even food from us, they took the intellectual capacity of the African people and created that kind of so-called Western civilization. But in case, for me, it is world or human civilization. But with colonization attached to Christianization, attached to warped Western civilization, was the notion of control, including control of food and control of water and control of land and anything that was on the side of both the Anglophone Africa, Lusophone Africa, Francophone Africa, Arabophone Africa. But at the end was condemnation. Africa was condemned to the gallows of world civilization. Having said that, on the side of theology, at the beginning of the All-African Council of Churches, we were aware that with colonization comes evangelization. And with evangelization, it came to a point where Western theology was so entrenched within the colonial powers that African concept, African converts begin to kind of behave as if they are Westerners in terms of their worship and so on. By the time came when there was ordination of African priests like ourselves, that we also perpetuated the colonization of Africa through evangelization. And we perpetuated Western theology to a point where we had to stand and say, missionary, go home, and begin to do African theology, liberation theology, and Black theology as means of the emancipation from Western thought and Western kind of church. Having said that, I'm saying as we talk about this food issue, there was the religious dimension on that. One of the first things God gave us as human beings is food. So this, after Adam and Eve were settled in the garden, God showed them food. And again, I want to kind of say to Ferruzi that I concur with him. I know Ferruzi may not be a theologian, but there is a theological part towards this issue of the struggle for food. God bless.
Oh, thank you so much, Brother Lucas, for the valuable contribution. A very insightful one, a very moving one. You're giving us a background and kind of the possible solution to the challenges that we are faced with. Members, we have been in touch with Dadewethu Nomfanelo. Thank you so much, Secretary, for the attempt. We will then invite her. She won't be able to show her face because she's connected through the cell phone of Secretary. She'll be able to make her presentation, give us the lecture, then after which we'll then engage the entire discussion. Over to you, Dadewethu Nomfanelo. We've given you a round of applause twice. We are therefore suspecting that the challenge is with our hands. We'll rather do it at the end. Over to you, Dadewethu Nomfanelo.
Okay. Oh, thank you so much, Honorable Boise. Once more, sincere apology on my part for the technical glitches. In his book, A Way of Being, by Ben Okri, he says nature and history are not just about the survival of the fittest, but also about the survival of the wisest, the most adaptive, and the most aware. So I'm just using this as a preamble because we were having it very hard trying to connect to each other. And yet, because of the way we can be adaptive and the way we can be wise, we were able to finally connect. Without further ado, all protocol observed, I wouldn't want to take a lot of your time. Once more, salutation to the Premier, Honorable Zulu, Babuz Kalala, Mamu Boyce, the Deputy Speaker wakhe, umlingane wakhe, Honorable Tembu, Chair of Chairs, Honorable Duma, Deputy Chair of Chairs, Honorable Zungu, the Chief Whip, the Deputy Chief Whip, Namalungo Ngana, Alendlu Wisomthetho. kwiphondo laKwaZulu-Natal. Ngithuba nesinemo esike ngigijima, kodwa ngathi kuba nginomlando nephondo laKwaZulu-Natal. Angawathola amandla ukuthi angeke ngikwazi ukuba khona nane namuhla. As a proud daughter of the African soil, onqele ibele lapha baholi belophondo elinembayo eqhakazile kwihlabathi lonkana nasezizweni. The history of this province, KwaZulu-Natal, is known throughout the world with its heroes and heroines, kusukela kwizikumkani nezikumkanikazi, uQueen Nandi, uMama kaShaka, iNdlovukazi uNandi, ukuzokweqa kwabomama oNokutela Dube, abobaba oChief Albert Mkhulu, oLanga Lubalele Dube nabanye. This inaugural lecture takes place at a time when the world is dealing with the devastating consequences of the most vulnerable, the war, the escalation of the conflict between Ukraine and Russia. And as a country, South Africa will continue in multilateral fora to preach the importance of peace, because we do know as a country that comes from conflict, including the province of KwaZulu-Natal, we know and we have lived and we have seen how important it is to try and find the amicable solutions to our problems through peaceful means. So as these global events are taking place far from our shores, yet we fully understand their impact, because the impact is not a rhetoric or a slogan. We feel the pinch in our pockets, the high food and fuel prices, hitting the ordinary woman and men on the street, seeing the high fuel prices due to disruptions in global logistics, chain supplies, unaffordable grains that are a staple are in shortage because Russia and Ukraine feed a third of the world with their supply in terms of grain. So these are all the challenges that we are currently dealing with, including the devastation that has been caused when we bring this closer to home by climate change, especially in the province of KwaZulu-Natal, part of the Eastern Cape, as well as Northwest. If you ask me today, May 2022, 25 May 2022, what should we speak about when we speak about Africa Day? We always speak about the continent we want. And of course, in this instance, people refer to Agenda 2063. However, for today, I just want us to bring it closer to home and ask what kind of country we want that is going to be able to address the issues of food insecurity amongst our communities, and to bring it once more closer to eThekwini, to eKintetshwayo, to Endlovu, what kind of service we want that we will be able to ensure that we deal with issues of food security or insecurity. In a paper written by Comrade Magdini for the centenary celebration of the African National Congress, and I don't know, this is a house for all, honorable chair. She speaks and denotes the economic history of Africa under colonialism. And of course, she explains how racial domination and patriarchy has played a big part in the history of land alienation, and that this has had a fundamental impact on the African family life and gender relations, where African men were forced off the land to provide cheap labor in places like Gauteng, where I am currently addressing this gathering. I think it's very important that Mavizu Mnyaka-Mnyaka-Manzini raise those issues, because when we also speak about the theme for this year, the AU theme of the year, which is strengthening resilience in nutrition and food security on the continent through strengthening agro-food systems, health and social protection systems for the acceleration of human, social and economic capital development, I must say a very long theme. which is championed by President Ouattara from Cote d'Ivoire, who is the champion of food security on the continent this year. To me, there are also issues of control when we speak about food security or food insecurity. Who controls food production? Who owns the land? Who benefits from the food that is sown, the crops? And how does this assist the country, the province, communities themselves to be able to ensure that we're able to deal with issues that were raised in the Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs, which are mostly about eradicating extreme hunger and poverty among our communities. These are all interlinked and they intersect. So you cannot look at food security without looking at the means of the ownership of production within our own country as well as within our own province and communities. So it's very critical to know who in the food chain has access to ownership of this means of production, but also in the chain itself, who stands to benefit most when the land can yield the necessary crops that can be able to feed each and every African child on our continent. I think it's very critical, Chairperson, to restate once more what is South Africa's position when it comes to the subject that we are discussing today. Our domestic policy recognizes the need to address undernutrition and malnutrition in vulnerable communities. This also includes the associated problems of obesity as well as consequent susceptibility to non-communicable diseases. Taking part in the cost of hunger studies and supports African efforts to countries to reduce hunger, to reduce undernutrition and malnutrition, as well as to improve food security. South Africa also, both in continental, regional, and multilateral fora, recognizes the role that agricultural technology and innovation, nutrition education, and overall strengthened food systems can play in addressing malnutrition. I will end it at that. It's quite a long statement that has been made today already. But I want us to have a conversation, not so much of a lecture, about the women, the women, the youth, the aged, the most vulnerable in our communities. And I want us to talk about their role when it comes to food security. What role do they play? Namasimi, abalimayo, bayalima, bahambe, and in most instances, throughout the rural parts of our country, not just KZN, women are at the forefront of the struggles around land and making sure that the land, when it yields the necessary crops, it is able to feed families and communities. But when it comes to food markets on the continent, for instance, including with the new AFTA that we've been speaking about, that should allow trade amongst countries in our region, SADC, flow free, so that our own produce and our own products can be able to circulate in this giant African economy. Where do you find those women? Where do we find them here in our country, in Agri-SA? Are they there? When it comes to their produce, are they immediate people? Do we take the supplies and the yields and the crops from the villages and then sell them at marked up prices in regional food markets, in continental food markets, in global food markets? Where, how, and when do they essentially benefit from this market themselves? We also know that issues of food security are linked to issues around water. And of course, we know that water in our country is a big problem. we are a water-scarce country. We have seen, of course, together with the current devastating flood, that even when it floods, it does not necessarily mean that we have systems in our country, in our provinces, that can be able to ensure that we are able to retain water. And we do know that with the state of many of our dysfunctional municipalities, things that we could have done on our own as legislators, as part of our enhanced oversight, were unable to do those things because control is part of, has placed a very huge dynamic in terms of what goes into our water boards, water authorities, and so on. Linked to this is the question of health when it comes to malnutrition, when it comes to dysentery, when it comes to typhoid, and so on. We do know that through the policies of the government, at least for school nutrition, we can say in the lower quintile that children are able to access basic nutrition, healthy nutrition when they are able to access food. But in conditions that have been created by COVID-19, for instance, pandemic for the past 2-3 years or so, we have also seen a high rise and a high increase in the number of children that have not been able to access basic nutrition, so as to avoid malnutrition. Many women bear the brunt of ensuring that they provide nutrition in households that have absolutely no form of income stream. And these are the issues that we need to talk about when we say think globally and act locally. Yes, we can ask what could have Nkrumah done and so on, but what are we doing now? History has given us these opportune moments to be able to make meaningful changes to the lives of ordinary people in our country and in our province. We have seen the red tape, how it impacts on our ability to access food, including during this current floods that have devastated the province, unfortunately twice in your case. There's a lot of red tape. We have had in certain instances to rely on food donor agencies. I saw a news article today of the UNDP that decided it would be able to also contribute some amount to ensure that we're able to alleviate this. But when all these things happen, how are our communities organized? Are they able to access the necessary resources that will allow and ensure that communities do go to bed with something, even if it's the most basic, soup, food, non-perishables, and so on? Are we organized through civil society structures to make sure that we are able to do this? And do we have systems that will be yielding and resilient so that when we have these other bouts of very extreme climatic conditions, because we know that the Indian Ocean is rising, and what we're experiencing now, including with what is happening in the small islands elsewhere in the world, especially with Madagascar nearby, has a direct effect on what is happening in our own countries. Women who are the ones who cook this food, who plow the fields, are they fully resourced enough so that they can be able to continue providing nourishment and sustainable livelihood within our communities? And the answer is no. And we have to ask the questions that make it impossible for this motive force to be unable to do so. Year in, year out, just as it tells us about the pressing and urgentness that face women in our country. When it comes to employment, we know that if it's five young people that do not have jobs, the likelihood is that 3 out of those will be young women the scourge of gender-based violence that affect women impacts on their ability to access food security. If a woman economically is unable to provide for herself, there are issues of domination, there are issues of control that play into that space. And what do we do about that? Sometimes even food security is used as a bargaining tool to negotiate transactional relationships within our communities. We've seen this in happen. We have seen it in our tertiary institutions of learning. Young women come in early in the year. They want to find access to boarding facilities, tertiary institutions. NSFAS hasn't come up, and we know what they get. Sometimes subjected to by very opportunistic elements who occupy higher echelons of power in these instances. So for me, a high-flown discussion on food security at this point, especially what the province is going through, will not be helpful at all. How do we harness the energy of the private sector? You live in a very rich province when it comes to mineral wealth and mineral resources. How are we structuring this relationship? Yes, indeed, KZN also has traditional communities where Amakosi play a very critical role. And these are the ones that are much more closer to communities and who are likely to hear their dire cries every day. How do we engage as the progressive government to make sure that we are able to ring-fence allowances, incentives, packages that will ensure that when we have instances that were facing like today, women and children, the aged, do not have to suffer in the manner in which they have done thus far. We do know that most of African countries, in most of the African countries, women make the majority of half of the entire population. In addition, they produce 60 to 80% of all the food. They had 30% or more households. And this is a monumental task. And therefore, if we have strategies that do not value women's entrepreneurial contributions, we will not be able to address the food of the issues of and challenges of food insecurity, including access to land, including access to food production, including access to how that land is utilized to benefit women. I want it enough because I would probably feel more comfortable to interact when we raise questions in the audience. But I think it's very important that if the programs of government, if the programs of civil society are unable to ensure that Africa sees itself, then we have a problem. In closing, some of the colleagues that are here might have read the curriculum by the late Gaddafi. That green book speaks about the solution of the problem of democracy, the authority of the people. Part 2 speaks about the solution of the economic problems, socialism. Part 3 speaks about the social base. I'm raising this because Muammar Gaddafi was one of those in Africa who was very keen in ensuring that this unity of Africa is experienced in the most profound way. I think he was far ahead of his time, and his ideas were a bit difficult to embrace at the time. But I think for the province of KZN that hosted the World Conference Against Racism, the province of Kwazulu-Natal that hosted the inaugural summit of the African Union in 2002. I think you have a rich tapestry of information, knowledge, institutional wisdom that you sit with currently, because as much as you are a metro, sometimes cosmopolitan, you have very strong African continental features when it comes to the makeup, the DNA, and the footprint of your province, which is not almost the same case in all other parts of the province. So how do we use this DNA? How do we use this architecture to be able to ensure that we deal with these issues? And one of the things that you have people who value their culture. You might think this is something that is like second nature, but it is not. You have people who value their culture, their customs, their traditions, and including in the indigenous knowledge system about how to deal with issues of food security. Those indigenous women can be able to assist us in terms of how best we can utilize those methods. 4IR has not been very kind to us, although we mooted it as a nice term. We've kind of slacked down on it. But I think we do need to find a way of going back to the drawing board to ensure that we use methods that will continue to sustain the livelihoods of our communities. I will leave it at that for now, Comrade Chair, but all I wanted to do was just to say, let's think globally, act locally. We have the resources, we have the wisdom, we have the brain, and I think with all the challenges that we have had to deal with COVID-19 pandemic, the leadership of that province is in a better space to be able to take that province forward, and hopefully and likely the lessons that could be learned from there will be used to benchmark the kind of country we want and the kind of province that we want in our country. Thank you so much.
Unmute.
Oh, thanks. My apologies. Thank you so much, Mam Tim, for the valuable contribution you have made before us. We really appreciate it. But members, allow me to also welcome this Honorable Speaker of Eastern Cape Legislature, Honorable Umlibo Koboshian. Siyabingelela Nkomo, siyabonga kakhulu ukuthi ube nathi kule ntambama njengesifundazwe saKwaZulu-Natal. Siyabonga. Siyafisa ke ukuthi siqhubeke bese siqalile sithi we are dealing with issue of discussion, clarity seeking questions, comments where we feel siyafisa ukwengeza. Sithathe isandla sikamfowethu uLucas previously. May I then invite hands that will contribute to this lecture? We are all welcome to contribute. I'm also inviting our academics. Staff members, you are also welcome. This is Africa Day. We all have a role to play in shaping the future of this continent. Any takers? By the show of hands. Maybe it will be proper while we are waiting for hands also, in as much as we acknowledged the members of the executive, but I have since noticed that we have one member of the executive, Honorable Mavimbela. Siyathobeka kakhulu dadewethu Mkholo ukuthi uthathe isikhathi ube nathi kule ntambama. Obviously we will be biased. Ingane umntana wendodakazi lo. Umshana wasendlunkulu, so we cannot afford not to acknowledge her if she's with us. Siyabonga kakhulu Honorable Mavimbela.
Indaba ezethu wena wakhula silibele. Ngiyathobeka.
Siyabonga. Yeah. Seemingly Lucas was the only person who wanted to contribute, which I believe all our speakers were clear, and we are all I'm seeing his hand. I'm not too sure whether he wants to come back, because in our rules we're only talking of the issue of cell phones and the issue of raising of hands. Obviously, if it was in the house, we have contributed on the matter. But I guess mhlambe khona afisa ukuphawula. Over to you, Mfowethu Lucas.
Well, in the perhaps absence of others participating, I wanted to comment on one more thing. Ferrous spoke about pre-colonial Africa in the context of food, but something that maybe he might have left out. In this pre-colonial Africa, Ferrous spoke about the agricultural advancements of the pre-colonial Africa. I want to add that in pre-colonial Africa, the mining with gold and iron was already in our continent before it was discovered in the global north that Ferrous is talking about. That it can't just be agricultural production of food as well. I think we need also to include the production of iron. Like we know about Tabazimbi, we mined iron far long before the global north people came down here. Gold as well. But besides that, you remember that some of the wonders of the world, especially Zimbabwe and so on, where we as Africans have shown our mathematical architects in terms of building huge structures before, that is pre-colonial Africa. So I'm just adding that, though today we're talking about food and agriculture, but maybe sometime we might also talk about pre-colonial mining by African people. Just to add that on the map, because that also, like African intellectualism, was taken to the north. Also, African iron and gold were taken to the north. And there we are today, struggling for food that God has given us. God bless. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lucas. I will then request that we then invite the panelists. I'm seeing the hand for Ferrous, which I believe he'll be responding or even commenting. So I will start with him, then another two presenters that have spoken to us, if they want to have a bite. I'll start with him, then Nomfanelo, lastly, Besekubo, Honorable Speaker of the KZN Legislature, in that order. Ferrous, the platform is yours.
Thank you so very much, Program Director, and thanks so very much to the contribution and the comment made by Dr. Lucas. I think the first comment is really very relevant, Dr. Lucas, regarding how the church played also a very great role in preparing or in preparing the space for the establishment of colonial administrations and colonial institutions in the continent. And that same role that the church did play, like what you've mentioned, has also played a very important role in terms of how land was dispossessed from people and how Arab land was identified through the existence of missionaries in the continent. And also the issue of mining, pre-colonial mining institutions that existed in the continent. You are really very correct, because these two are directly linked to some of the issues affecting food security. Because some of the areas where there was massive Arab land that the people could use for food production was taken by these colonial powers that took over, and mining were established in those areas. That is to show you that in this same discussion around the issue of food security, there is a need, like we correctly mentioned, to involve the church directly or indirectly. And Chair, I also wanted to raise the issue of nutrition by looking at the quality of food that we import from other countries, especially from the global north. Because some of these food are not necessarily the food that we could really appreciate by saying that we are importing food that does not have negative impact to our people throughout the continent. And also the need for the Western industries in terms of raw materials. Some African countries' policy position regarding agricultural productions are influenced by former colonial powers, so as those countries can produce agricultural products that are needed in the global north. We have huge evidences that explain how France as a country has influenced agricultural production in the former French colonies in West Africa, and how the French have really been intervening indirectly into the production of cacao in Ivory Coast and Mali. I think all of those things, Program Director, are really very important while we are discussing the issue of food and nutrition by looking at the food that we import from outside of the continent. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you so much, Mr. Nkwamba. Nomfanelo, any comment, any taker?
My dilemma with what we often discuss on this data, and it's a legitimate dilemma about the role of the former colonized. And what I always struggle with all the time is, for instance, with cocoa and the chocolate produced and so on and so forth, and beneficiation from that, coffee, beans, rice, staple food that we eat in our country. How is it that after 28 years, for instance, and I'm being very focused on South Africa, although I do know that it is a continental debate. Why is it that it is still very difficult? It's basically like conference, can share with us what the lived experience has been in the Eastern Cape when it comes to ensuring that we take our produce to the market and we go through all the regulations, the tariffs, the phytosanitary measures, and yet we are still where we are. I think it is very important to acknowledge that history of former colonizers, be they Portuguese, be they French, be they English, be they German, and so on. But I want us to get to a point where we can be able to say exactly what it is that we want to do about this situation. We interact with them in a number of summits, we take a number of declarations, we issue a number of communiques. They have bilateral engagements with many of our black 54 countries or so on the continent. And they still play a very big and very active role in our mining industry on the entire continent. But how is it that even with these engagements and auditors and declarations and commitments and all the diplomacy that happens in that area, we still have not been able to strike a deal that works in Africa's interest? Africa is here now. Hopefully, when we finally get through all the necessary protocols, that is matters right, the policies right, the regimes in our countries to enable the free movement of people and goods. At what point, how do we envision this future that's going to take us to agenda game? And I think for me, the difficulty is always that we need the kind of agile, young African practitioner on the legislative front, the state front, economic diplomacy, that is going to be able to negotiate at global fora to make sure that our needs are met. Right now, our political leadership, of course, part of it is in the World Economic Forum in Davos. What have we taken there? What are other African countries taking there? What is Africa's common position when it comes to issues of trade? That, like the same way we look at Africa's common position when it comes to issues of peace and security. Where do we feature here? And I think these are questions scholars, thinkers, practitioners, influencers, legislators have to talk about. And right now, I am not getting the necessary noise as what is the strategic direction that Africa is taking in all these multilateral engagement. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tim, for the contribution. May I then hand over to or invite our honorable speaker for the comment? Mahobel.
Thank you, Makeba. I think also from my own side, I'm going to align with those who spoke before me that one of the reasons for us to start to have this type of interactive discussion in the recognition and celebration of Africa Day is for us to have impact. That impact can only be realized when we do not leave the talking for days like the 25th of May, but we strategically, in the platforms of influence that we stand in, advance for a change. I will make an example of what we have done on the side of the parliamentarians. There is a move that whilst we are all members, still members of the Commonwealth Parliamentarians Association, which for the longest of time has been continued to be an organization that is administered and a charitable organization of the UK. Africans led by South Africa through the legislature of Gauteng stood up to say that this can't continue. Let's move to have it to be more of at an international level as an international organization or multinational organization that is not owned by one country. We need, therefore, the same courage, whether it's at the level of CHOGM, where our heads of states meet, or at the interministerial levels, at the international level. I know that there are committees or associations of ministers where we have to raise what Africa needs. But my major problem also is that Africa further divides herself by non-significant things. I say they are non-significant because at the end of the day, whether we are Christian or you are Muslim, you remain an African, and when we are saying Africa is still exploited, we are all exploited. But you find that when we go to these other platforms, we put forth issues that further divide Africa. So this work for the advantage of the colonizer, because when Africa is not speaking on one voice, no one will listen to us. Coming back to the role then that I think we must play as Kwazulu-Natal Legislature, led of course by you, Honorable Zulu Mtwana, is to ensure that we have these conversations, but we also do not leave the conversations to be just conversation. We also use the human resource that we have in our province, whether it's in politics or it's in religion. I will make an example of Ubaba Ungwejane here. There are many like him who have worked through time and have interacted at a higher level to impart the same knowledge and the same expertise to the younger generations. When I say younger, I am not speaking about you and I, Makeb. I'm speaking about the real young, those who are 35 and below, so that we have them being part of the conversation, because they still have the necessary energy, courage, and conviction to move forward. I know that we are taken as if we are young. Me and you, we are not young. Our kids must be given that opportunity to live that, but also involve women leaders in those conversations, because there are young women who can take this baton forward. I know that when we're speaking about people that might have this expertise, we might only look at those we know, because for me, I know Babu Lucas Ngwechane, I know Abo Baba, Professor Kumalo of the Methodist Church. But there are many, including women, who have traveled this journey of being diplomats, who understand the politics of how we cooperate at the international level. These conversations must continue, but in the true sense of being an activist, people-centered legislature, we must not only talk and meet each other next year, but let's have a more programmatic action that will lead us to the next webinar, where we come back and report on what we have done, including dealing with the issues of land ownership, especially land ownership by women in the KwaZulu-Natal context. The rural women in terms of land ownership. What is it that is happening? Especially, we know that some families, when a husband passes on, the widow is left without the land because it's inherited by the son. We must confront this and how and agree on how, whilst not living our culture, but we can move forward in ensuring that poverty is eliminated in Africa. Another one that we need to discuss when we want to speak about the issues about taking Africa forward is the issues of the undocumented foreign nationals that are in other countries. How is it possible that we continue to have these discussions not raised by parliamentarians and politicians? Because their impact is far-reaching in terms of the people they represent. There are areas of conflict. You find that we think that the conflict is with everybody that is non-South African. But the major topic that we are avoiding is people who are fleeing their countries because there are issues of war there. But also people who enter other countries, including South Africa, without using the proper channels, without being documented, without having the necessary papers. including South Africans who also move outside of South Africa, not through the proper channels. These are some of the issues that we will have to confront when we discuss issues that continue to perpetuate the poverty and the wars that are happening in Africa. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you so much to our presenters. I fully support the issue of a programmatic action, Honorable Speaker, particularly to what we have touched on, but adding a rider to say the issues of food security as well must have a discussion on it. Not leaving the issue of the human trafficking, whether you read the print media or you are watching the news or you are listening to radio sets, but I think there is that particular challenge that we need to face as a continent. But also the issue of crime. Well, I'm not talking of a crime that has been labeled to a certain color, but crime in general that is taking place in the continent. I think we really need to get closer to it. I think we have had a fruitful discussion. Obviously, we are where we are because of the foundation that was laid by our parents. As the speaker has indicated that we are no longer young. We are no more longer young. Obviously, we need to kind of lay the foundation for the generations to come. The baton we have taken, kufanele sidlulisele kubantwana besizwe, kubantwana base-Afrika njengoba sasithathile, kodwa sithi here are the milestone achievements. Ngibona isandla ke sika Prof Prof Ars Mangalis. Bese ngithi sengiyafisa khona, I was thinking that we are drawing closer to a closure, but I can give you 2 minutes, sir. Prof?
I'm just in trouble in terms of, yeah, I've just unmuted, yes. It's just the reception here is also not good for me. The connection is quite poor, and I really apologize about that. I would have wanted to make a contribution much more earlier. But firstly, to express my gratitude for the invitation. I really feel honored by that and happy to make a contribution. One of the things that I wanted to just highlight is that it has become almost a subculture on Africa Day that every time when we meet together to reflect on Africa, we of course it's important to look back at history, but we cannot stay in history. We need to celebrate what we have from the past. But the tendency sometimes is to always look at how great we were and how messed up we were by colonization. Of course, those are facts. It's true. We're messed up. But my quest and thinking is that we need to focus more, therefore, how do we make Africa great again? You know, what is it that we are not getting right? That these legacies of poverty continues, of all the problems that we've just put in place here. Why do we have that continuing almost every year? We don't seem to be making headway in terms of developing Africa. I hope that could be the focus more going to the future. But lastly, also just to say, I think we need to learn a lot from those who went before us, when you started, and I hope it's you, Mtwana, but somebody spoke about quoted Upixliga Isaga Seme. When one thinks of Seme, thinks of Kwame Nkrumah, thinks of all the Jen Dube and many, many more others who worked under extremely difficult conditions to uplift Africa and Africans. Now we are in a much more privileged position compared to them. We've got so many resources. We've got telephones, we've got cell phones, we've got cars, we've got anything you can think of. Why is it that it's difficult for us to double the achievements of Africa compared to those people who worked under extremely conditions when there were no resources that they could use to develop us? And how did they develop this love and ideology of African nationalism?
As you learn,
thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Honestly, I understand. If we're in a physical platform, I'm certain that you would have been able to contribute earlier on. But I'm having a comfort that the speaker has suggested that we must do away with the issues of meeting only on the 25th of May. Let us have kind of the programmatic action, which I believe the contributions you have made are assisting us, but obviously it will find expression as we take this particular program for African continent that will deal with the issues that were highlighted by the presenters, that at least we can be able to then feature in your contributions. Thank you so much, Bulaz. I was saying we are drawing to a closure. This is our last item, but may I take the opportunity to thank members for the contribution, for even affording us an opportunity as the KZN legislature. We might have an idea, but if we do not get support from our fellow brothers and sisters, it will not have been a success. But in the process, while we are dealing with this, at least we are able to touch on the certain section in the Constitution, Section 108 of the Constitution, which mandates the legislature to allow members of the public to take part in all legislative processes and to promote public awareness and the participatory democracy. I must say that we have had a number of members that have found information and obviously connected virtually, even in other platforms of social media, whether it's the Facebook page for the legislature. We are really humbled and honored. At this juncture, may I then hand over for the words for the word of thanks. I will then invite Honorable Deputy Chair of Chairs in the KwaZulu-Natal Provincial Legislature, Honorable Makosazana Patience Promise Zungu Kwabin Nyamagayish.
Thank you, Chair. Allow me to switch off my video or my camera so that I don't tamper with the waves. Thank you, Chair. Honorable members, our distinguished guests, all webinar participants, you are very much informational and educational. You are very much welcome to us. We thank all the contributions that you have made. Our unreserved gratitude to our presenters, in particular, Usisi, Udadewethu, Mfamfa, Nofanele Kota, who's a diplomat and an activist. Also, the contributions from all members, including Mr. Ferrous Wamba, for dedicating their time to this webinar. Isn't just a good gesture to us as a legislature, but it's a contribution to the entire nation and the country and the world at large. For we know that people across the globe are also following or attending to this webinar. It's not only us in KZN. Since this is the first webinar that we've done as a legislature, and indeed one is also in support and appreciate the guidance that is given by our Honorable Speaker of saying this should be done in a way of a program that is continuing. Today might be the first, but we're looking forward to many webinars or lectures of this nature, so that whatever that was shared today doesn't lose its substance, but it grows, because knowledge is power. We know for the next generations that are coming after us, they need to come up with strategies of ensuring that our continent, Africa in particular, is in a good state where everyone, every person from whatever part of the world will be looking upon, in line with what we envisage through the Agenda 2063 of the African Union. Our Chair of the Standing Committee on Public Participation and Petitions, Honorable Zulu, we thank you for the program that you've had directed. You've overseen the program very well. The Speaker of our legislature for the role the office played, and also the officials that assisted that this program becomes a success. Also the wisdom that she continuously shares to empower us as legislators. We are really humbled and honored. We thank you very much for all the work that you have done, the submissions that have been made by all the participants that had contributed and made submissions in today's program. May our God and Trinity continue to have mercy on all of you and your families. Save and bless Africa and her children. Grant its leaders the wisdom to lead and take Africa to greater heights. Thank you so much, Chair.
Thank you so much, Kwabini. Siyabonga kakhulu. We have come to the end of our lecture, Africa Day lecture. Thank you so much. We are duly adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairperson.
Thank you, Chairperson.
Thank you.
Ngabezitha siyabonga Makete. Siyabonga mntwana Phumlile.
Ngabezitha